Chapter 7b. "I could skip longer than that," she said when she stopped. "I've skipped as much as 500 when I was 12, but I wasn't as fat then as I am now, and I was in practice." Mary got up from her chair, beginning to feel excited herself. "It looks nice," she said. "Your mother is a kind woman. Do you think I could ever skip like that?" "You just try it," urged Martha, handing her the skipping rope. "You can't skip 100 at first, but if you practice, you'll mount up. That's what Mother said. She said nothing will do her more good than a skipping rope. It's the most sensible toy that a child can have. Let her play out in the fresh air, skipping, and it'll stretch her legs and arms, and it'll give her some strength in them." It was plain that there was not a great deal of strength in Mistress Mary's arms and legs when she first began to skip. She was not very clever at it, but she liked it so much that she did not want to stop. "Put on the things and run and skip outdoors," said Martha. "Mother said I must tell you to keep out of doors as much as you could, even when it rains a lot. So thou must wrap up warm." Mary put on her coat and her hat and took her skipping rope over her arm. She opened the door to go out, and then suddenly thought of something and turned back rather slowly. "Martha," she said, "they were your wages. It was your tuppence, really. Thank you." She said it stiffly because she was not used to thanking people or noticing that they did things for you. "Thank you," she said, and held out her hand because she did not know what else to do. Martha gave her hand a clumsy little shake as if she was not accustomed to this sort of thing either, and then she laughed. "Thou art a strange old womanish thing," she said. "If thou'd been our little Elizabeth Ellen, thou'd have given me a kiss." Mary looked stiffer than ever. "Do you want me to kiss you?" Martha laughed again. "Nay, not me," she answered. "If thou was different, perhaps thou'd want to thyself, but thou isn't. Run off outside and play with thy rope." Mistress Mary felt a little awkward as she went out of the room. Yorkshire people seemed strange, and Martha was always rather a puzzle to her. At first she had disliked her very much, but now she did not. The skipping rope was a wonderful thing. She counted and skipped and counted until her cheeks were quite red. And she was more interested than she had ever been since she was born. The sun was shining, a little wind was blowing, not a rough wind, but one which came in delightful little gusts and brought a fresh scent of newly turned earth with it. She skipped round the fountain garden and up one walk and down another. She skipped at last into the kitchen gardens and saw Ben Weatherstaff digging and talking to his robin, which was hopping about him. She skipped down the walk towards him, and he lifted his head and looked at her with a curious expression. She had wondered if he would notice her. She wanted for him to see her skip. "Well," he exclaimed, "upon my word! Perhaps thou art a young'un after all, and perhaps thou's got child's blood in thy veins instead of old sour buttermilk. Thou's skipped red into thy cheeks as sure as my name is Ben Weatherstaff. I wouldn't have believed thou could do it." "I've never skipped before," said Mary. "I'm just beginning. I can only go up to 20. "Thou keep on," said Ben. "Thy shape's well enough at it for a young'un that's lived with heathen. Just to see how he's watching thee," jerking his head towards the robin. "He followed after thee yesterday, and he'll be at it again today. He's bound to find out what that skipping rope is. He's never seen one. Eh," shaking his head at the bird, "that curiosity'll be the death of him sometime, if thou doesn't look sharp." Mary skipped all around the gardens and round the orchard, resting every few minutes. At length she went to her own special walk and made up her mind to try to see if she could skip the whole length of it. It was a good long skip, and she began slowly, but before she had gone halfway down the path she was so hot and breathless that she was obliged to stop. She did not mind much, because she had already counted up to 30. She stopped with a laugh of pleasure, and there, lo and behold, was the robin swaying on a long branch of ivy. He had followed her, and he greeted her with a chirp. As Mary had skipped towards him, she felt something heavy in her pocket strike against her at each jump, and when she saw the robin, she laughed again. "You showed me where the key was yesterday," she said. "You ought to show me the door today, but I don't believe you know." The robin flew from his swinging spray of ivy onto the top of the wall, and he opened his beak and sang a loud, lovely trill, merely to show off. Nothing in the world is quite as adorably lovely as a robin when he shows off, and they are nearly always doing it. Mary Lennox had heard a great deal about magic in her Aya's stories, and she always said that what happened almost at that moment was magic. One of the nice little gusts of wind rushed down the walk, and it was a stronger one than the rest. It was strong enough to wave the branches of the trees, and it was more than strong enough to sway the trailing sprays of untrimmed ivy hanging from the wall. Mary had stepped close to the robin, and suddenly the gust of wind swung aside some loose ivy trails. And more suddenly still, she jumped towards it and caught it in her hand. This she did because she had seen something under it, a round knob which had been covered by the leaves hanging over it. It was the knob of a door. She put her hands under the leaves and began to pull and push them aside. Thick as the ivy hung, it nearly all was loose and a swinging curtain, though some had crept over wood and iron. Mary's heart began to thump, and her hands to shake a little in her delight and excitement. The robin kept singing and twittering away and tilting his head on one side as if he were as excited as she was. What was this under her hand, which was square and made of iron, and which her fingers found a little hole in? It was the lock of the door, which had been closed 10 years, and she put her hand in her pocket, drew out the key, and found that it fitted the little keyhole. She put the key in and turned it. It took 2 hands to do it, but it did turn. And then she took a long breath, and she looked behind her up the long walk to see if anyone was coming. No one was coming. No one ever did come, it seemed, and she took another long breath because she could not help it. And she held back the swinging curtain of ivy, and pushed back the door, which opened slowly, slowly. Then she slipped through it and shut it behind her, and stood with her back against it, looking about her and breathing quite fast with excitement and wonder and delight. She was standing inside the secret garden.